All right, in this episode, I'm going to be talking about personal protection dogs and police/military working dogs. And I'm going to get this out of the book, the Decoy book, which I wrote a couple of years ago with the help of a lot of very experienced and talented people. People like Barb Balone, Jerry Bradshaw, Tom Rose, just to name a few, many other decoys, Franco Angelini, who's in the cover right here. And so I wanted to put a little bit of extra explanation on this type of work because lately I've seen a lot of information, maybe a little bit of misinformation as well on personal protection dogs, police dogs, and obviously sport dogs. And the misinformation comes a lot from people who have not done any of those things, or from people who have dabbled in those things. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that from this book. I haven't read this book. Obviously, I wrote this book, but I haven't read it in a long time. So I'm going to look at it with fresh eyes. If you ever read a book, and if you happen to read the same book a second time, you pick things up from that book that you didn't pick up before. It's kind of like watching a movie. You pick up on details that you didn't see before. That's kind of what it's like for me every time I reread any book. So I'm going to go over this now. So the personal protection, police, and military work section of the book, which is on page 15. So I'm going to read a little bit about it. I'm going to discuss it as I go. Okay, the application of bite work training for personal protection and police and military work is a known and common practice in the protection industry. There are records of dogs used in military applications tracing back as far as the Roman period. That's actually true. There are records of dogs being used in the Roman period for certain military applications. What the extent of that is, I'm not sure, but I know that there are records of that. There is no quote-unquote trial decoy in this type of work. The dogs are not being prepared to quote-unquote pass or score high on an event. Although there are events held to showcase the police and military working dog skill, it is not the reason to train these dogs. So there are events, there are certifications that these dogs have to pass every so often. The certifications, that is. The events aren't really a whole lot of events, but there are some events specifically geared towards the working dog, towards the police dog, and that kind of stuff. The ultimate test of these dogs comes in the form of criminal apprehensions, deterrence of a potential threat, and at times life and death situations. The decoy's job is to prepare the dog and teams for as many training variables as the imagination can conceive. So the decoy here, the helper, the person assisting in the training, this is where the creativity and experience of this person comes in, because we have a police dog or military working dog. The scenarios that they're going to see are different from scenario to scenario. There are some commonalities, there are some common denominators, there are some things that the dog will have to do at some point, but there are going to be a lot of variables, a lot of pictures that are going to be different. And so this is where the training, the helper, the decoy, the person conducting the training, as well as the handler, have to put their heads together and come up with scenarios that will stretch the imagination. Anything from building searches in the dark. Now, in an ideal situation, obviously, we would not necessarily make that call. A lot of departments will not send a dog on a building where there is a known suspect. There is a bit of a policy with some agencies, some departments, but some will. But anything like that, any scenario that may fall out of the norm. I remember training police dogs, and some of the things that I had to do was climb a tree for some of the open area searches, go in dark buildings, stuff like that to Again, push the limits of the imagination for the sake of the team, for the sake of the dog, the handler, so that if they happen to see any weird crap, they've seen some of the weird scenarios that we can throw at them during training. Many of the skills a protection sport dog can acquire are very applicable to real life scenarios, and I believe that wholeheartedly. There are very anti-sport people out there. If you follow any dog trainers, you've probably been around them, you've seen their posts, you've seen their comments. Very anti-sport mentality from them, where they're like, sports are bad. And they don't come out and say blatantly that sports are bad, but they have this tone whenever they talk about sport dogs. But again, this comes from a place of ignorance, and I'll tell you why it comes from a place of ignorance. Sports usually get lumped into one category, right? So a person that thinks about sports, a person who maybe has dabbled in sports, there's a little bit anti-sport, they've dabbled in sports, they've done a little bit of it, but they'll maybe done a little bit of Schutzen, right? So if they've done a little bit of IGP/Schutzen or IPO at some point, that used to be called, if they've done a little bit of that, then they'll go, well, I did sports, and they'll go, sports are not good because the dog is so focused on the sleeve, the dog is this, that, and the other, it's very choreographed. Well, yeah, if you've done primarily Schutzen is very predictable. There's not a whole lot of variety in the protection phase. So to have done Schutzen and then lump all the other sports into that category because you've done a little bit of sports doesn't really give you an accurate representation of what sports can actually do, the benefit that sport training can bring to real life scenarios. This is my opinion. Okay, I personally do PSA. So I've been doing PSA. I've competed in the high levels. And so I understand the benefit of some of the surprise scenarios that you're going to see in PSA in the level 2s and definitely in the level 3s. Some of the things that we're training our dogs to do for level 3 surprise scenarios and even some of the level 2 surprise scenarios are downright applicable if I was to train a dog for police work. The scenarios have to be creative for surprise scenarios for PSA. So now I'll go back to the creativity aspect of training police dogs. There has to be a creativity aspect to those scenarios as well. So in my opinion, from my experience doing a little bit of, and I'm kind of saying this, obviously, I don't dabble in PSA. I'm actually pretty committed to PSA. But, doing a lot of PSA training, I can see the benefit of that. And having done police dog training myself, I can see that there are some correlations. And I know people, so one guy that I'm going to name drop is Clay Smith. Clay Smith is a PSA judge, and he's also a competitor. He's competed in the level 3s. So he's an experienced competitor. He's a PSA decoy. He's also a PSA judge, and he's a police dog handler. So listening to him talk about the correlation between some of the surprise scenarios and police dog training applications, you can see, okay, again, I'm saying this also from experience, but also hearing Clay, somebody else, say that definitely validates that. So the hate that comes from the sport, anti-sport people who don't fully see the benefit of sports, you can really see a little bit of that ignorance. Not that they're being willfully ignorant, not that they're being jerks, not that they're being closed-minded. They truly do not understand the benefits that some of the sports can bring into real-life scenarios. Because again, PSA and Schutzen and Mondial Ring and French Ring, they're not the same. They all have their own qualities to them, but they're not the same. Like a lot of people try to lump them all in just one category. The person getting the bite, right, will not wear equipment. So the police dog trainer, the police dog, the military working dog, if they're in patrol applications, patrol deployments, they're biting people without equipment, right? So this person will not adhere to a training plan. There will be variables there that don't fall within the category of, well, if we do this, you have to do this, you have to do that so we can help out the dog. So this is why there is a lot of there's a lot of variables in protection training and police dog applications. And I have a section here with Franco Angelini, who he's not a sports trainer. He does police dog training. So Franco Angelini was very kind to speak to me to contribute to this book. I love this book, not because I put it together. This is not a pat on my back, but because of the wealth of experience from different people, from different backgrounds that have contributed to this book. So if you get to read it, if you've gotten to read it, if you're planning on reading it, I know you're going to get a lot of good information from it. Not because I'm bringing the information. All I did was compile the experience of all these wonderful people that contributed to it. So again, going back to the book, I think it's going back to that particular section. Military working dogs, police dog applications, even personal protection training. They're all different, definitely different than sport training, but there are some similarities here that I believe can enhance our training all the way around if we are open-minded about the whole process.